Ever get that feeling, where you're stuck in this loop of reacting the same way over and over again?
Yeah.
You're like, ugh, I wish I could change that.
Yeah.
Well, today we're going deep on self-control. We're pulling some really cool insights from this series called Seeking Wholeness by Unchained Disciples.
Oh, interesting.
We're going to explore, how to manage those tricky emotions
Okay.
and break free from those patterns that just keep us stuck.
What's fascinating about this series is that it's from a Christian perspective,
Right.
but the strategies they talk about, they're really practical no matter what you believe.
Yeah, I think that's what drew me to it, too.
It's all about finding that sense of, wholeness. And they define it as being spiritually, emotionally, and mentally healthy.
Okay, so wholeness sounds pretty great.
Yeah.
But, what does that actually look like? In everyday life,
It's about becoming free from those negative influences, the ones that can really weigh us down. It's about past hurts, those thoughts that keep nagging at you.
Right.
Even pressures from the outside world.
So it's like finally gaining control over, your inner world.
Exactly. And they actually outline 37 specific traits of wholeness.
I know, right? We won't go through all of them today.
That's a lot.
But imagine things like, setting boundaries, being authentic, managing those big emotions effectively, and learning to, truly forgive.
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack, but I guess true wholeness isn't just a quick fix. It's
Yeah.
like a journey, right?
Yeah, it's definitely a process.
Okay, so each of these traits, I guess, plays a role. But since we're diving deep on self-control,
Yes.
let's zero in on how this series tackles stress.
Right.
Because let's be honest, stress is a universal experience.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I know I can definitely relate to feeling overwhelmed sometimes.
Absolutely.
What about you? Oh, for sure, for sure. And the series, it starts by discussing these things called stressors, basically things that, we perceive as challenging or demanding.
Okay.
And this could be anything, right? From
Yeah.
losing a job
Yeah.
to even positive things like starting a new job.
Oh, interesting.
Or even getting married, right?
Right, yeah.
It's all about our perception.
So it's not just the event itself, but it's how we interpret it.
Exactly.
And how we react to it.
Yeah, and they break down 3 ways that we deal with stress.
Okay.
They talk about proactive strategies. That's what we do to prevent stress. Reactive strategies. That's how we respond in the moment.
Okay.
And then what happens when things kind of boil over,
Oh, boy.
displaying emotions.
Gotcha.
So let's start with those proactive strategies.
Okay, yeah.
What does that look like? What do you think?
I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Think of it as being the architect of your environment, right?
Okay.
It's about creating this space where you're less likely to be triggered and pulled back into those old patterns of behavior.
Makes sense.
And they talk about, controlling who you spend time with.
Right.
The situations you put yourself in,
So being mindful of the people and the
Right.
places that might bring up those negative emotions.
Precisely. And they use this really fascinating example. I don't know if you've heard of this.
Okay.
It's called the never again philosophy.
Never again.
Yeah, have you ever felt so hurt by something that you were just I never want to feel that way again?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I think we've all been there.
Yeah.
And so this philosophy suggests that, when we experience that deep hurt, we try to avoid it at all costs. So someone might say, never again will I be weak.
Right.
And then they overcompensate by becoming controlling in their relationships. Or maybe it's never again will I be needy. And so they isolate themselves to avoid vulnerability.
Yeah, I mean, I can see how wanting to protect yourself from pain is, understandable. But it seems like it could backfire pretty quickly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
While it's, natural to want to protect ourselves,
Right.
it can lead to some unhealthy behavior.
Yeah.
Like you said, it could be controlling behavior, people-pleasing, or becoming so afraid of risk
Right.
that you miss out on, amazing opportunities.
So it's about, finding that balance.
Exactly.
Between protecting yourself but not becoming, too rigid or shutting yourself off from the world.
You got it. It's not about denying our emotions or pretending we don't have needs. It's about learning to manage them in a healthy way.
I like that.
Okay, so now let's shift gears a little bit and
Right.
talk about those reactive strategies, those in-the-moment reactions to stress.
Okay.
And these can be either active or avoidant.
Okay, so if proactive strategies are setting the stage,
Yeah.
reactive strategies are what happens when the curtain rises.
Perfect analogy.
So break it down for me. What's the difference between active and avoidant?
So active strategies are all about, like, tackling the stress head on.
Mm.
Think like seeking support from friends or a therapist,
Right.
actively problem solving, or, using those calming techniques like meditation or prayer.
Right, right.
The series really emphasizes that these are all like healthy ways to cope.
So it's about facing the music, so to speak.
Exactly.
What about those avoidance strategies? Those sound a bit more like, I don't know, burying your head in the sand.
They can be,
Yeah.
and we all do it sometimes, right? It's
Yeah.
about escaping or numbing the pain instead of addressing the root cause.
Right.
So this could be anything, right? From losing yourself in work,
Yeah.
binge watching TV, emotional eating.
Oh, yeah.
Or even, using substances to escape.
Yeah, and I imagine the danger with those is they don't really address, like, the underlying issue.
Right.
They just create, like, a temporary distraction.
You hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
Temporary relief, but it often makes the situation worse in the long run.
Yeah.
And that brings us to, like, that third approach,
Okay.
displaying emotions, which
Right.
is what happens when those coping mechanisms, they just fail us.
And this one sounds pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Isn't it just about, like, letting your feelings out?
It is, but it's often more complicated than that.
No.
Think about those times when your emotions are so strong that your coping strategies, they just don't cut it.
Yeah.
And you have what the series calls, like, an emotional outburst.
Oh, yeah. It's like the pressure builds and builds, and then you just, like, explode.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And it's important to remember experiencing those strong emotions.
Right.
It's a normal part of being human.
Yeah.
We're not robots.
Definitely not.
The key is to, like, find that balance.
Okay, so what does this balance look like in terms of wholeness?
It's about being able to use all three of these approaches. Proactive, reactive, and even allowing yourself to, like, feel those big emotions, but without getting stuck in any one of them.
Gotcha.
The series emphasizes that, like, a truly whole person, they're not someone who never gets stressed or
Right.
never feels those negative emotions.
Right.
It's someone who can navigate those challenges effectively, using a variety of healthy tools.
So it's about building, like, that emotional agility.
Yeah.
Being able to, like, adapt to whatever life throws your way.
Exactly.
But I'm curious, how do we even, like, begin to build that agility?
That's a great question, and it leads us to, like, one of the most interesting parts of this series, I think, the exploration of emotional triggers.
Ooh, okay.
Have you ever noticed, like, those things that just, like, set you off, even if they seem, like, small or insignificant to others?
Absolutely. Are we diving into trigger territory now? I'm all ears, because I think we all have those buttons that get pushed.
Oh, yeah, we all have them. And they define, like, these emotional triggers as reactions that are, like, way bigger than the situation warrants.
Yeah.
It's that feeling of, like, overreacting, getting, like, way more upset or anxious than seems reasonable.
Right.
And usually it's because something has poked at a deeper wound or insecurity that we might not even be aware of.
It's like the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more going on beneath the surface.
Exactly. And to illustrate this, they share this really powerful story about this boy who had this really tough experience with his father as a child. They call it The Boy Who Was in the Way. It's a story about how, like, those unresolved experiences can show up as triggers later in life.
Oh, I love a good story.
Yeah.
Tell me more about this boy and, like, how his experience relates to triggers.
So this young boy, he was sent to bed by his father, but then later he woke up thirsty.
Okay.
And he went to get some water.
Makes sense.
And as he's, like, walking through the living room, it was dark. He sees that the TV's on, and he kind of pauses for a second, to watch a show he likes.
Yeah.
Now, his dad, who had been drinking, was actually sitting in a chair, like, right behind him.
Oh, wow.
But the boy had no idea.
Oh, no.
So the dad, he's, like, getting more and more agitated, and he, like, gives the boy 10 seconds to move out of the way.
Oh, my God.
But the boy, completely oblivious, he doesn't respond.
Oh, no.
And so that's when the dad, he like, slaps him on the back of the head.
Oh.
And just starts yelling at him, calling him, like, stupid, worthless, and in the way.
That's awful. I can't imagine, like, how scary and confusing that must have been for him as a little boy.
It was definitely a traumatic experience. And as the boy, grew up, this one incident, it just kept affecting him.
Yeah.
Even as an adult, he would get triggered by, like, seemingly insignificant things. Someone walking up behind him.
Oh, wow.
Someone blocking his view of the TV. Even being told he was in the way. these like little things would bring back all that fear and anger he felt as a child.
Yeah.
And he would just overreact in ways that, he later regretted.
That's such a powerful example of how, like, those unresolved childhood experiences can just, like, shape our reactions as adults.
Right.
It makes you realize that sometimes our triggers are, like, echoes of the past.
It's a great way to put it. Those triggers, they're not just like random annoyances. They're often like pointing us toward those deeper wounds that need our attention.
Yeah.
They can help us understand what we value, where we seek validation, and even like what we might be afraid of.
So triggers can be, like, these clues
Yeah.
to help us, like, uncover those areas where we need to kind of do some inner work.
Exactly.
But what's the next step? How do we actually address those underlying issues
Right.
and start to break free from these patterns?
That's where forgiveness comes in, and it's a powerful tool for self-control.
Forgiveness, yeah, that makes sense. If we're constantly holding on to that anger and resentment from the past,
Right.
we're letting those experiences kind of control us even years later.
Exactly. And the series really emphasizes this point that like true forgiveness,
Yeah.
it isn't about saying what happened was okay
Right.
or waiting for the other person to apologize.
Yeah.
It's about like releasing yourself from the burden of their actions. It's about reclaiming your power.
So it's like choosing freedom over captivity, even if the person who hurt you never acknowledges what they did.
You got it.
I love that. But honestly, forgiveness can feel like so hard,
Oh, yeah.
especially when we've been like deeply hurt. It's not as easy as just like flipping a switch.
Right.
Do they like offer any guidance on like how to actually begin this process?
They do. They offer several practical tools, and one they highlight is this thing called the S.T.O.R.M technique.
What?
It's like a 5-step process for managing those intense emotional reactions when they hit.
Okay, I'm always up for a good acronym. Break it down for me.
Okay, so the S stands for stop and take a deep breath. This is about hitting the pause button on that like automatic fight or flight response that just takes over when we're triggered.
Right.
Gives us a moment to collect ourselves.
It's like creating a little space between the stimulus and the reaction.
Yes.
Which can be like so helpful in those heated moments.
Exactly. Then the T is for tune in to what you're feeling. Like we need to identify the specific emotion that's driving our reaction. Is it anger? Fear? Sadness? Jealousy? Like naming it helps us understand it.
Right. It's like bringing that emotion out into the open instead of letting it kind of fester in the shadows.
I like that.
Yeah.
And the O is for observe your thoughts. What story are you telling yourself about this situation?
Yeah.
Are you like catastrophizing, assuming the worst?
Yeah.
Or taking things personally that might not even be about you?
For sure.
It's about recognizing those mental traps we often fall into.
We can be our own worst critics, right?
Yeah.
It's so important to like challenge those negative thoughts.
Absolutely. And that leads us to the R.
Okay.
Reframe your thinking. This is where we like challenge those initial interpretations and look for like alternative explanations.
So instead of just accepting those like initial knee-jerk reactions, we're actively looking for a more kind of like balanced and realistic perspective.
Exactly.
Wow.
And finally, M stands for move into self-compassion. This step is so crucial. It's about being kind to yourself.
Yeah.
Reminding yourself that you're worthy of love and grace, even when you mess up.
Right.
We all make mistakes, and that's okay.
Yeah, it's like being your own best friend, you know? Like offering yourself that same kindness and understanding that you would offer to someone you love.
I love that. It's about recognizing you're human and you're doing the best that you can. And so in addition to like this S.T.O.R.M technique, they also recommend, setting those healthy boundaries. Oh, yeah.
To protect yourself from like manipulation or abuse.
Right.
And they also talk about taking your struggles to God in prayer.
Yeah, those are such great points. Boundaries are all about like knowing your limits and communicating them clearly, which can be incredibly empowering. And yeah, turning to a higher power for support, whatever that looks like for you, can provide like comfort and guidance when we just feel overwhelmed.
Absolutely. And so, as we kind of explore this idea of self-control, the series brings up this interesting concept. They call it dying to self.
Dying to self, huh? I'll admit that phrase always kind of makes me think of something like extreme or even a little scary.
Right.
So like, what does that actually mean in this context?
It's not about literal death, of course.
Okay.
It's about surrendering our ego and that like constant need to be in control.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that true strength often comes from letting go.
So like acknowledging our limitations.
And accepting that we don't have to, like, carry the weight of the world on our shoulders. That
Yes,
we don't have to do everything on our own.
precisely. And they connect this beautifully to a passage in the Bible, Galatians 5:22-23,
Okay.
which lists self-control as a fruit of the Spirit.
Mm.
So the idea is that, like, true self-control, it's not just about willpower or, grit.
Right.
It flows from a connection with something bigger than ourselves.
It's like tapping into a source of strength and wisdom that's, like, beyond our own limited understanding.
Exactly.
Yeah, it makes me think of that saying, let go and let God.
Exactly. And to illustrate this idea, they share this charming anecdote
Yeah.
about a grandmother who was given a washing machine as a gift.
Oh, nice.
But she continued to wash her clothes by hand on a washboard.
Oh, that's kind of sweet. But also, like, a little frustrating. Why wouldn't she use the washing machine? It may make her life so much easier.
Right. Well, she was so used to doing things the hard way, using her own effort and strength that she didn't realize, like, there was a better option. She didn't even think to try the washing machine because she was just so stuck in her old ways.
What a perfect analogy for how we often approach self-control.
Right.
We get so caught up in our own, like, striving and effort that we forget to kind of tap into that source of power and peace that's, like, readily available to us.
I love that. That's such a great connection.
Yeah.
And it highlights, like, a key message from the series, which is that true self-control. It isn't about, white-knuckling our way through life.
Yeah.
It's about surrendering to something bigger than ourselves
Right.
and letting go of that need to be in control of everything.
It's about, like, finding that sweet spot where our efforts meet grace.
Yes.
I love that imagery. It makes me think of, like, a sailboat catching the wind. It's still working,
Yes.
but it's also allowing itself to be kind of propelled by this force that's greater than itself.
I love that analogy. And I think it speaks to the heart of what we've been talking about.
Yeah.
That surrendering to something greater.
Right.
It doesn't mean we become passive or give up on our efforts.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing there's this power beyond our own that can help us navigate the storms of life with more ease and grace.
Speaking of surrendering, something that, like, really stood out to me from these sources
Yeah.
was this emphasis on, like, getting closer to God in a truly authentic way. Not just, like, going through the motions of religious practices.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
You know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean. And they use this analogy of date nights.
Oh, okay.
You can go through the motions of, like, planning a fancy dinner and
Okay,
buying
yeah.
flowers, but if you're not genuinely connecting with your partner, it's, like, all for nothing.
It's like checking boxes instead of, like,
Yeah.
nurturing the relationship.
Yeah.
It's missing the heart of the matter.
Exactly. And they say, it's the same with our relationship with God.
Mm.
Reading scriptures and praying, they're important.
Right? But they're meant to, like, facilitate that intimacy and connection.
Yeah.
Not just be items on a checklist.
It's about cultivating, like, a deep and meaningful relationship.
Yes.
Not just, like, performing rituals out of obligation.
Right.
That really resonates with me.
And it's in that, like, heartfelt connection with something bigger than ourselves that we find the strength, the peace, and yes, even the self-control that we're all seeking.
Yeah.
It's about opening ourselves up to a source of love and support that can, guide us through the challenges of life.
Yeah, I love that analogy of the date night. It just really makes it clear, it's not about just going through the motions. It's about, really cultivating that true intimacy, that connection, whether it's with a partner, with a friend, or with, like, a higher power.
It's about showing up authentically
Yeah.
and being present in the moment.
Absolutely. And, as we've been talking about all these, like, different aspects of self-control.
I keep coming back to this idea that it's not about being perfect
Mm-hmm.
or never having, like, a bad day.
Right.
It's about, like, progress, not
Yeah.
perfection.
You got it. And the series really emphasizes that, we're all works in progress,
Yeah.
and that's okay.
Yeah, I like that.
It's about embracing the journey,
Right.
with all the ups and downs,
Mm-hmm.
and recognizing that even those moments when we stumble, they can be opportunities for growth.
It's like those moments when we, like, fall off the bike.
Right.
We learn from those experiences and we get back on, hopefully a little wiser, a
Yeah.
little more resilient.
Exactly. And I think that's a really encouraging message for
Yeah.
anyone who's, like, struggling with self-control.
Mhm.
It's not about beating yourself up,
Right.
when you make a mistake. It's about, like, learning from those experiences and, using them as fuel to keep moving forward.
So if we're thinking about, like, practical ways to bring this all together. The understanding of our triggers, the practice of forgiveness,
Yes.
this idea of like dying to self. What's like the one thing you hope our listener will take away from this whole like deep dive?
That's a good question.
What's like the golden nugget of wisdom?
I think the most important takeaway is that true self-control, it's not just about willpower.
Mm-hmm.
It's about like recognizing that our reactions,
Yeah.
they're often rooted in these like deeper unresolved issues.
Right.
And it's about like doing the work to heal those wounds, right?
Mm-hmm.
Through forgiveness, setting boundaries,
Yeah.
and most importantly, connecting with a source of strength beyond ourselves.
So it's about understanding that we don't have to go it alone, right?
Exactly.
There's like a wellspring of support and guidance available to us if
Yeah.
we're like open to it.
Absolutely. And as we kind of wrap up our deep dive today, I'd like to leave our listener with like one final question to ponder.
Oh, I love a good thought-provoking question. Hit me with it.
Okay, so what area of your life could benefit the most from like a deep dive into self-control? You know, is it your relationships, your reactions to stress,
Right?
maybe those unhealthy habits you've been wanting to break?
Yeah.
I invite you to kind of reflect on that and see like where this new understanding of self-control might lead you.
It's like a powerful invitation to just take these insights and apply them to our own like unique journeys,
Yes.
Because
Because ultimately, self-control is about freedom.
freedom.
Freedom from those reactive patterns that keep us stuck. Freedom to make choices that align with our values. And freedom to live, a more fulfilling and meaningful life.
It's a freedom worth striving for sure.
I agree.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time for another insightful exploration.